Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Christian Music Industry Podcast. I'm your host, Wisdom Moon, and today I have a special guest, David Smallbone, with me. Welcome, David.
Good to be here with you, Wisdom. Thank you for bringing your wisdom to the old bloke, the gentleman of increased vintage, 15.
I think I understood, 2/3 of that, maybe. Just to give you guys a little background, especially if you haven't watched the movie Unsung Hero, David is an artist manager, I almost said farmer, because you do have like a farm,
Yeah,
right?
got a little farm. Yeah.
Former record label executive, former musician, and caretaker to about 200 farm animals. That sounds like a lot of work and a lot of fun.
A lot of fun. It's therapy.
Yeah. Through the hills and valleys of his veteran career in the music industry, he's been carried through by the steadiness of Jesus and his wife, Helen. Helen and David have 7 children together, 3 of which are Grammy Award-winning artist Rebecca St. James and 4-time Grammy Award-winning artists Joel and Luke for King and Country. And David is an advocate of Jesus and the local church, and he continues to manage for King and Country to this day. My first question is, when will you be retiring?
Well, I was talking to a buddy the other day who's similar age and been around life and been around people who do retire, and he said a lot of people die a month after they retire. And so, if you were to talk to my current girlfriend, who's also my wife, she would say to you, David doesn't see what he does as work. Now, as we both know, we're both in the ministry. Some days it does seem like work, but I think what an honor that we're allowed to be involved in something worthwhile, something purposeful. So I doubt I've got peripheral neuropathy, so that's numbness in my feet, numbness in my fingers, and that's slowing me down a little bit. But I'll go as long as I can. I think until I think what I do a little bit, I've got some pretty strong little children. I think I help bring perspective. And I don't claim to always have the right answer, but I might have an idea that leads us all to the answer. And they really respect me by still wanting me to be involved in important decisions. So my youngest son does day-to-day, runs a business exceedingly well. And then I'm kind of 30,000 feet, really big stuff. I was just on my way here, I was talking to Jeff Roberts, who runs our booking agency, very good friend, accountability partner. I called Mike Kerb last night about something, who runs our record label. And then I'm in the real little stuff. I watch what's going on social media. And so I impact at a reasonably high management level, and also at the lowest level of just staying in touch with what's going on in the world. To me, that's all pretty important.
Yeah. So obviously you've accomplished a lot in your career. How would you describe your current season? You mentioned kind of like the 30-foot view and also getting involved in some of the smaller things, but do you feel like this season right now is different, and how is it different?
Well, I think until my youngest son came on to help run the business 8-9 years ago, it was exceedingly busy, because I was a manager, I was on the road early for King Country's career. I was doing merch as well, really involved in everything. Now we have a team. And then what happened 2020 when COVID came, prior to COVID, we had 3 buses on the road. And then we had trucks as well, production trucks. But because of the economy of that season, we cut back from 3 buses to 2 buses. And so I had just turned 70 at that time. So up till then, I'd been on the road all the time. I was on the road all the time with King Country, on the road all the time prior to when we were out with Rebecca. And we traveled as a family. And so that pushed me to stay at home. And I still go out probably when we're on tour. I'll go out once every 2 or 3 weeks or so just to stay in touch with everything. But I think it moved from being hands-on to, okay, how do we keep this ministry focused and going in the right direction? And my conclusion in artist development, and you being a marketing guy, you can understand some things. It involves a lot of the little things, and what we do as artists and as managers, a lot of times, well, we've got to get the big marketing push. We've got to get, the 100K to launch this new album, or we've got to get on radio, all type of things. And I think a lot of things, it's how we treat people, how we treat people on the road. Are we servant-hearted? Are we egocentric?
Yeah.
And I think I worry about, to keep Mike Kerb, the owner of our record label. Okay, how can we? Well, I'll tell you one thing. Our core principles are loving on the brokenhearted and sharing the most wonderful message known to man to as many people as possible. So I think staying home, which I started to do 5 years ago, it's given me time to think about things. Okay, how do we do this as best we can? Because what happens, you've worked for record labels, a lot of times it's the tyranny of the urgent. And we don't have time to think, how do we handle this challenge creatively and in a clever way, and not getting overwhelmed. You and I have something in similar in understanding, because we're both internationals, and coming from other countries. Australia is probably more post-Christian than South Korea, but we came from a post-Christian country, and to do Christian music down there, I had a record label and a promotional company, was not easy, but I think was a great apprenticeship for what we're doing now. So I'm serious as a heart attack about how do we share this wonderful message loudly, not just to the church community, but wider than that. And so that's what I'm not in show business. I'm in the ministry. I love, cynical the music business, love the church. And I'm trying to bring in how we do business. I'm trying to bring the church into our processes. And as you know, you're a veteran. It's a bit of a crapshoot on occasions.
Yeah. And I'm sure you've seen so many, especially behind closed doors kind of meetings and decisions being made over the years. And I've been in those kind of rooms, and sometimes I'm like, wait, are we Christians having this conversation right now about a Christian artist? And sometimes it does feel more like a business, and people are trying to make a profit versus a true ministry, which of course there has to be revenue to support everything, and
or it all stops.
It does feel very tricky sometimes to go, okay, this is ministry, this is kingdom, and then there's this whole business aspect, and how do you integrate that with faith? And actually this was a big conversation on our last episode with the previous guest, Jem Goshen, who's actually a songwriter at Curbword. And we were having this conversation of how does an artist navigate that? And I'm sure you being passionate about it, you can help really steer that with artists that you work with and influence that. But how would you, guide an artist in that way that maybe feels that tension?
Well, I think we are working in God's economy, and I think what happens a lot of times in Christian music world, it's business first in the way we think, and you just alluded to that. It's business first and ministry second. And I think it's the responsibility of us old blokes I am including you as an old bloke, that we challenge whoever we come across, including the high-level executives. Okay, you're involved with us. It's ministry first and business second. And we're not always going to get there.
Yeah.
And so I came to a, not a crisis point, but I realized that about 16 years ago that our industry was a little spiritually bankrupt. You know, we were in show business more so than the ministry. And I thought, well, what can I do in my small area of influence? So I purposed in my mind that every meeting that I took, I would share a devotional. And I just did that with you just prior to this time. And that gets interesting with people who don't have our values. My neighbor, so I went and had coffee with my neighbor last year. And at the end of our time, I shared a devotional. Well, he's an atheist. And and he didn't say anything at the time, but I ran into him 2 weeks later somewhere because he's got a little farm next to our place. And he said, Smallbone, I'm upset with you. You tried to evangelize me when we got together. And I said, well, okay, let's have another coffee. And you tell me why you're an atheist. And I'll tell you why I'm a Jesus follower. But I've had the most interesting discussions because of that initiative. And it came out of me thinking, this Christian music thing, it's spiritually bankrupt. And what can I do in my small area of influence to make a change? And my encouragement to anyone listening and watching this, find a way that is you're comfortable with of, in your business connections, involve Jesus in the conversation. And it's going to be different to me doing a devotional, but something unique to yourself, because I think there's a bit of a problem here in the Bible Belt. We're all spoiled rich kids, and we take the wonder of Jesus for granted, and we hide our light under the bushel. And that's not good enough. I think we need to change. The world is hungry for this extraordinary, wonderful, practical, powerful message.
Yeah.
And I don't think we can allow any conversation to go by. And it could be as much as you got a friend that we're having coffee with, well, how are you doing? You know, and they say, well, I'm doing poorly. Well, we pray for them. We say, okay, well, I'm going to. But it's almost like here in the Bible Belt, which has got to be the best place in the world to live. I think we're a little too comfortable.
Yeah.
And I think we need to be challenging each other to be louder in our conversation. And for me, I think it's important to get up there on the platform and share the hope in Jesus. But I think a lot of us rely on the pastors or the musicians to do the hard work for us. And, we have a responsibility to be his disciples and go out there and talk about his wonder. And so I've got 7 kids, 16 grandkids, another one coming. I want them to have a full life. I want them to give their lives to Jesus. I gave my life pretty late, midlife, and I regret that I lost a lot of years. So now I'm loudly trying to catch up.
Wow. So yeah, I think a lot of what you were talking about, especially with kids and grandkids, it has to do with legacy. And even in this industry that you've worked in for a long time. And if you haven't watched Unsung Hero, definitely you have to go watch it. And
yeah, support the poor, the 7 poor and needy Smallbone children. Thank you, Wisdom.
And I mentioned before we started recording, I watched it twice in theaters, once with my wife, and then the second time with all of our kids.
Even your son, who's here, he cried.
Yeah,
just one tear.
And he's not a crier. Yeah, it's such a powerful story, and like we saw ourselves in the story, and like God's faithfulness, and how actually the timeliness of that was that my wife and I were praying with our kids about moving back to Nashville, and a lot of your story in the movie was about taking that step of moving here to Nashville as a family and not really like knowing, having a plan, and even the plans you had falling through.
Yeah, I
And
did. Yeah.
so, yeah, we really like were inspired by your story and the movie, and also like, yeah, just the legacy that you have in this industry, I think is so powerful. And the fact that you're using your influence to talk about the importance of, faith in Jesus, and
Well, nothing else makes sense. Like
yeah,
we can come, you're a marketing guy and I've been around marketing. We can come up with the greatest marketing plans, but if it's just for entertainment, it's a
yeah,
waste of time. But I think the great thing about Christian music, it can change a person forever, can change their family, and it can mean not a life half lived, but a life fully lived. And I want to encourage people to live the adventurous life. And the adventurous life is living by faith and living for Jesus. And that can come in all shapes and forms. But on the hard questions, we look for the faith answer more so than the security answer. And we all want security, but when we were out of security and not knowing most weeks how we're going to put food on the table or pay the rent, those are some of the best years of my life. My wife, I remember we'd go on over in Brentwood, Lipscomb Drive there off Concord. Rebecca would look after the kids. I think she was 15, 16 at the time. And just Helen and I would walk down the road at night. We had nothing going on, but it made our marriage stronger. And then for the kids to see the miraculous, because a lot of parents these days, they provide so well for their kids. When the kids are in church on Sunday, but it's almost like we're talking about these stories that happened 2,000 years ago, and how is it relevant to me today? It was none of my doing. I didn't really want to live in poverty, but I now look back, one of the greatest gifts of my life. The two greatest gifts were living in poverty and going deeper with Jesus, and meeting my wife in Sydney after moving from Brisbane 54 years ago. And it's emotional for me to think about it, because I've been given these two incredible gifts, a wonderful wife and forced to live in poverty, and seeing the hands and feet of Jesus. And I almost recommend it for every man.
Yeah. I mean, I could relate to that. I grew up in poverty, in Korea. We were living in poverty. Moving here, it was in California, and I was 9 years old, and we were living in poverty. My parents were trying to make ends meet, working overtime in an assembly line, and there were very difficult days, and we would hold on to, hope in Jesus. And actually, one thing that I haven't told you is, so back in 1999 when we moved, I didn't speak any English, and
Really?
I started fourth grade out in California, and I had no idea what they were even saying in class, but I could tell the kids, definitely looked at me weird, and they started making fun of me, and there was a lot of racism. And somebody actually introduced me to Christian music through Caleb, and I started listening to Christian music. And Rebecca St. James was one of my favorite artists.
Really?
Yeah. And
what a great story.
I owned every single one of her cassettes and CDs. I actually went to at least one of her concerts, and saw her, and her music like really impacted me. And I actually remember even her song "Speak to Me," like using that as my prayers to the Lord, and I would just cry out with that song on, going like, "God, speak to me." And yeah, her songs actually like made a huge impact growing up. And like Christian music, how it influenced me at that age is why I'm in Christian music now. So yeah, just to see like even, people that are behind the scenes. I mean, I didn't know who you were back then, and
Yeah,
didn't even know that there were managers back then. You know, I
yeah,
just knew about the artists and
yeah.
radio and bookstores. That was pretty much it. You know.
Hmm.
So as somebody, I guess I'm curious about somebody that's been working behind the scenes where, you know, maybe the typical Christian music listener may not know your name outside of the movie. What have you, I guess, seen be really impactful as somebody that's influencing the artists behind the scenes and helping guide their career and their ministry?
Well, I think there's probably two things. I think accountability is very important. And I think particularly for artists that are coming from out of town into Nashville, we survived here when we were doing it tough because of the connection with the church. It was People's Church, now Church of the City. They loved on us. And there was another church called Brentwood Baptist who furnished our house. And so I think the church thing is so important. Accountability is also having truth tellers in your life. I think that is, and I don't think I understood accountability until I hit my 50s. And I think it might be more important for men than women. I think women just, you know, they'll have their women's groups at church, and us men, we tend to be loners. But I've got, up until 2 months ago, I had 7 accountability partners. Now I've got 6. My old accountability partner, he just passed away at 78, and I've got the joy of next week organizing his celebration service at Church of the City. Then the other thing I'd say is when you take on, if you're an artist and you take on a ministry partner, be it a booking agency or a manager, do your due diligence. A lot of marriages don't work, and part of it is it's a passion thing when they meet, and then they get married, and then they have difficulty talking to each other. So I had an interesting thing happen the other day. A buddy of mine, he's a rich investor guy, and he's just moved from California. He had a house at Newport Beach, sold that, and bought a house downtown Franklin. And his wife's a very strong Christian lady. He's in church, but he's just an incredibly successful business guy, and he doesn't necessarily think of Jesus first. But he had a principle, a business principle that I've never heard from anybody else. He said, and he helped some of the richest people in the world invest their money. And so when he was making a decision to take on a new client, he would take 9 meetings with that client before he committed. Wow. And then the 10th meeting, he'd bring his wife in. And his wife, who's a very spiritual lady, would make a character judgment. And I thought, because you and I have both been around a lot of artists where they've had a manager for 6, 9, 10 months, and then it all falls over. And I think there's probably that honeymoon period. The relationship looks good on paper. Yeah. But I think lovingly do due diligence, ask the hard questions, and probably don't rush into it. I think there's something about having a manager. It's like a creative marriage, and because as you know, sometimes managers talk to their artists more so than wives and husbands talk, because they're so busy. But the manager and the artist are just trying to make this thing work, and they're trying, and it's. You look at all the artists you've worked with, and probably how many have been successful? Probably 5 to 10%. Like it's hard yakka out there to make something work. And so You need the wisdom of Solomon. And I think in Christian music, I'd be making sure you have somebody, that manager has a Christian perspective, is on the same page. And the last thing is probably working out a joint mission statement. And that way you can hold each other accountable. Oh, this doesn't seem to be working too well. What's going on here? And you can work through it. Doesn't mean that you go your separate ways because something's got confused. But I do think that mission statement is probably more important than we sometimes give it credit for.
Man, that's really good stuff. Yeah. When it comes to accountability, I'm curious. I mean, for King & Country as one of the biggest artists, Christian artists in the world, and as we've all heard, the more successful you are, the more yes men you have around you, and the less likely somebody's is going to keep you accountable and challenge you on things. And obviously, you have a interesting, unique relationship with your artists. They're your kids. So with artists that maybe you aren't related to, how does that work as far as accountability? And is it also like, should they find accountability from elsewhere outside of their team, the label?
I think they need both. But very good question, by the way. So I think my challenge to anyone, we're in Christian music, we're very precedent driven, and a lot of the times we're very boring. We're just doing the same marketing plan somebody else has done, and we're afraid to do it differently. With Rebecca's career, it was a 50-50 deal. And so I own 50% of that artist. And I did that because I was worried if there ever was a financial problem, she would end up suing us, which has happened a lot with child-parent business relationships. So I went to my attorney and I went to my accountant and said, this is what I want to do. I want to do a 50-50 deal. Say, I can't do that. That's too overreaching. But I really felt it was a Holy Spirit moment and that I'd been prompted to do that because I wanted to protect the father-daughter relationship. And it lasted well for 20 years, 20 years plus. Then when For King Country came along, my sons saw that the Rebecca-dad relationship worked well. So with For King Country, we did a third. So I own a third of For King Country. So there's not many 75-year-olds that that are still working unless they're rich investment guys, because over at Capital, as soon as you hit 55, they push you out the door. You probably know that.
Yeah.
And so I'm 20 years, I'm 75 now. So here I am at 75, I'm doing the best I've ever done. Like, how did that happen? And I put it through a God's economy approach. And so it's, there's a traditional artist-manager relationship, which is normally 15, 20% of whatever the artist takes in. You know what it's like. You need the wisdom of Solomon, and the industry's been negative to a lot of my ideas. And you and I, because we're both internationals, we see things a lot differently. Yeah. And I do think that's why the industry likes us, because we're prepared to think outside the box, because our societies are so very different to what's. Australia is post-Christian. America has a foundation of faith, right from the word go with the Pilgrim Fathers. So, it's been a little, the last political leadership over here is getting a bit wobbly. You had the president who said he was a good Catholic, but he supported abortion. That didn't add up to me. And so I think it would come down to finding counselors who think outside the box. You probably need a counselor who just loves you, and then you need a counselor who understands the business. And one of the problems for a lot of young artists that start, their parents will be their manager for the first period of time.
Yeah.
And they know little about the industry.
Yeah.
And so always be looking for wisdom. And the interesting thing about wisdom a lot of times challenges the status quo. It challenges the normal business approach. And I think that, and so the accountant and the attorney said, Smallbone, you can't do the 50-50 deal. But what that allowed me to do, I just focused on Rebecca. And you know what's the problem? What's the problem with most artists? Record labels, managers aren't giving them enough time because there's so many other artists that they've got to deal with. So with both For King Country has my total focus, and Rebecca had my total focus most of the time. I managed Skillet for a while, and I then connected Skillet with their current manager, and I stopped managing Skillet because I wanted to focus on Rebecca. I felt it was the best thing for my family, and it was what my calling was. So sometimes, Skillet's made a lot of money, and one of my sons reminds me of that. Said, "Dad, you should have stayed with Skillet. You would have been wealthier." But it's not all about the money.
Yeah, that's good. Man, there's so many questions I have. I would say one question I get a lot from artists that I'm curious to hear from you is, when do I know that I need a manager?
I think from word go, like, it's so hard. And you look at, I'm a promotional guy, but I'm not good at selling myself. And so you almost need somebody else to come in and look at your gift set and say, and then go out and amplify that. But you also need somebody to say, hey, you're messing up in this area. You're not, you went out and met some industry people the other day, and you weren't very relational. And so what happened then, you're probably never going to get that friendship back. And they're important people in this industry. So a lot of artists are very creative, but they're not very business functional.
Yeah.
And so they need people to help them, give them wisdom in navigating craziness. The number of artists that I know who are good at business as well as good at ministry, music, whatever, it might only be 10%, like, to have that business creative skill set. You've seen a lot of them. I know. This is the best answer. This is a team sport. You can't do it if you think you can do it by yourself. Occasionally, 1 in a million. But it's what I tell anyone who's prepared to listen. And we have a pretty big team around For King Country, and the church is part of that team. I want to partner with the church in helping us. So together, we share this message. I want to partner with the booking agency. I want to partner with the record label. I want to partner with our publisher. I see all these people, and I'm the ultimate sampler in the business. I brought you 2 books, a CD, and a DVD today.
Yeah.
I had this interesting thing happen. We had a new business manager come on For King Country 6 years ago, and he comes to me and says, he just met me and says, Smallbone, you got to make some changes here. Last year, you gave away $60,000 worth of product. You got to change that. And I said, buddy, while I'm still here, that's part of my mission, and it's called sampling. And I'm known for it. I'm boring about it. I love doing it. It upsets my wife on occasion because one of the things that I give away is her book. But I love it. I love it that all those materials they're all Jesus-centric. And not everyone's going to read the book. But I've had some people who, we've sampled them something, and it's changed their perspective. And in a weird kind of way, you give something to somebody asking for nothing back. they shake their head like,
Yeah.
what's the reason? Well, there's no reason other than hope. Hope it helps them go deeper with Jesus. And if they're not a Jesus follower, hopefully the story will encourage them to consider becoming a Jesus follower.
Yeah. So why do you call it sampling? Is it they're sampling something so that they can take the next step and do something else?
Oh, well, it's maybe a better way of saying is gifting, but you want people to have if it's a book you want to read, if it's music, well, sample what this artist is all about. What makes them tick? Do I like it? Do I not like it? Maybe for your son, because he's a rapper bloke, you need to be sampling. You need to be doing what I do, sampling my children's music to everybody I meet. That's the challenge of the day. See, I'm helping you, bro. I'm helping you. He's a marketing guy, so like he is listening. But I think the $60,000. Oh, I'm not sure I can get to $60K. I'm not sure that'll. I think we had some other promotions going that year. We try and be in our modus operandi. So if a promoter does a concert for us, we will always try and send them a fruit basket afterwards or something like that. We try and be grateful. We're not perfect at it, but not. I think another word that maybe help some of the people watching, partnership. We're in this together.
Yeah.
And if a partnership gets it right, it's 1 + 1 = 3. And I think that's what happened with Viking Country. Joel and Luke, very different, very, very different. But you put them together, they do very good work. And it's a beautiful thing that surprised them as much as it surprised the rest of us. Joel wanted to do a solo thing initially. And then I took his music round to everybody. Nobody was interested. And I said, why don't you experiment with your brother? And he said, oh, I don't really want to, but okay. It's my dad speaking. I'll try. And the rest is history. And it took them, they were in the wilderness for 5 years. They're like, no one was interested. And it took a guy outside our genre, Mark Bright, who was Carrie Underwood's producer and also founded Rascal Flatts. He was running Word Records, you remember, this was 14 years ago, for a short time, a year and a half, heard their music, loved it, basically signed them on the spot. And it took somebody out of our genre to see the potential. And I think one of the interesting things about Viking Country, the industry thought, oh, Rebecca's always been successful. Lightning doesn't strike twice. And so in a funny kind of way, I don't think the industry was that interested in, even because success is it's a rarity. You look at some of the labels you've been at, you've just had one artist really on one of those labels that has kept that label financial. And that great success that she had, it doesn't come across. It probably comes across, maybe happens once every 5 years. It's a rare and wonderful thing.
Yeah. What is your response to people that might say, like, oh, For King & Country was an overnight success?
They don't know what they're talking about. Because really, Joel started stage managing Rebecca, believe it or not, 28 years ago when he was 12. And
wow.
I remember I was on another podcast earlier today, and I told the people on that, we were up in New York at that stage. Rebecca's career was 3 years into it. We're setting up the stage at a union venue in New York, and the head union guy came along and said, you can't do this. You got a kid running the stage. And our sound guy, Ralph Rivera, went to him and said, okay, buddy, if you're not going to allow him to do this job, no show. The show's not going to happen. So they thought about it. Okay, we're not going to get paid. And they allowed the show to happen. At the end of the show, they gave him a union T-shirt. They enjoyed it so much because he was an old soul.
Wow.
He's been around music ever since they grew up
Mm.
doing music, and it's probably like your world, like your son's world.
Mm.
He's been around his dad, and his college is through you and watching
Yeah.
what you're doing, and he is, in a funny kind of way, he's prepared for this industry better than
Mm.
a lot of the people. And so Joel and Luke were probably doing it before it happened. So it started to happen for them. I think we signed the deal, 14 years ago. I just told you that happened 28 years ago. So that was a 14-year apprenticeship.
Mm.
And I think that's what stands them aside in the marketplace.
Mm.
They do really high quality production.
Yeah.
And I think instead of going to Belmont or Tribeca or Lipscomb, they went to the School of Hard Knocks.
Mm.
They were actually out there doing it. A lot of people coming out of those colleges, they got the head knowledge, but they're not practical.
Yeah.
And they're pretty practical. And I like it that your son has watched everything that you've done, and he's learnt from your successes and your failures. And it's a compliment to you that he wants to continue to do it. So Godspeed to you both.
Thank you. Yeah, appreciate that. When it comes to legacy, because you said you're 75 and you're kind of beyond retirement age, you said. And I mean, I think about legacy a lot, and I don't know why.
How old are you?
I am 44. So
you're a young bloke.
Yeah, I'm still kind of
31 years my junior. You had babies very young, man.
Yeah, I did. But I do think about legacy a lot, and to me, when I work with artists and talk to artists and provide consulting and things like that, I always talk about stewardship. How are you stewarding what God's given you, and what's the legacy you need to leave? And I'm curious, at 75, how do you think about legacy, and what does legacy mean to you?
I've never been asked that question. I think I want to be faithful. I don't want to get distracted from normal industry norms. I suppose my hope is that people will remember me as a flawed but committed Jesus follower. I don't really want to go to many more concerts. I want to stay home and put the ducks, geese, guinea, and chickens away most nights. I don't like traveling that much because all my life I've been on the road. Starting when I was in bands at 16 back in Brisbane, Australia. But I suppose the other hope is that they would view what my family was involved with as purposeful. Jesus-centric, because, it's a cliche, but it's real. Jesus is the hope of the world. And you understand some things better than most because you've lived in poverty. And with my kids living in poverty as well, I think they've grown up to be serious about Jesus. And I think, in a funny kind of way, even though it had nothing to do with it, the movie is a bit of our legacy.
Yeah.
And what's the major takeaway from the movie? God is good. And I think, you being a marketing guy and me being in artist development, I think the challenge is, how do we get smarter at sharing this wonderful message? Because I think in a funny kind of way, because we're controlled by the corporations a lot, and it's just a profit deal for them. A lot of times we're boring.
Hmm.
And I think we've got to find a way of being more creative, more persistent, and listening less to the culture. Now, we've got to be relevant,
Hmm.
but I think there's a wonderful, fresh authenticity about the Christian message. My challenge to myself, my family, anyone who's prepared to listen, and honestly, I'll be honest with you, I get into trouble from my family because I'm always talking to somebody.
Hmm.
If we're out for dinner, I'll get talking to the people at the next table. Recently, I got talking to the waiter, and it is, it's a cross that I bear, that my family on occasions think, well, Dad is focusing on others
Hmm.
instead of us. And so I've probably got to get smarter at doing both.
Hmm.
And, but my excuse is it's hard to teach an old dog new tricks. It doesn't help me too much, but I am an apologist. And I think even last Saturday, celebrating our 50th and having time to reflect, and not all my buddies can say this. I've had a wonderful life,
Hmm.
and it's because of two people. It's because of my wife, and it's because of Jesus. And both those people make me cry.
Hmm.
And you're seeing a bit of it now. And you know what it is? I'm undeserving. I don't
Hmm.
deserve what I've been given. And I do a lot of life with a lot of friends, and they haven't necessarily had it as good as I've had. Even my buddy who just passed away. And I kind of are in awe that I can say to you that I'm a very grateful old bloke,
Hmm.
and I'm a very thankful. I think I've had joy in the journey. I had someone come to me the other day and say, a buddy of mine who I've worked with a lot over the years, you know him, he's in the industry, I won't mention his name, but he said, Smallbone, you haven't aged in the last 10 years.
Hmm.
And I thought to myself, well, I feel like I've aged, but I think what I'm involved in doing is a passion project.
Hmm.
I don't see it as work. And I'm every day trying to view ways of how do we take this wonderful message wider. And I think our actions have to speak louder than our words. And I think, we can't, the way of the world is, well, you live in the big house and you're so proud of it and it's so wonderful and everything. My life experience is that and I live in a nice size house, but my experience is people who live in the really big house and are really rich, unless they're serious about Jesus, not a lot of joy there.
Yeah.
And so I suppose, this is a lengthy answer, but I hope that my legacy is he was viewed as an apologist for a wonderful Jesus.
Hmm. Yeah. That's awesome. My last question for you is, what did we not talk about that you would love to say to artists and people that work in this industry? What would you want to leave with them?
I think we've covered it at some length, but I think to look at a ministry approach that is God's economy more so than show business economy, because a lot of people are in our genre, a lot of corporations who are in our genre for profit. I think there's tension between business and ministry. And my encouragement is, on those hard questions, prayerfully buy into the ministry ideal ahead of the business ideal. It's almost like business, we can look at that, well, we know what that means. But you get into the faith world, where do you go? You know, in the ministry world, you're involved in the miraculous. Anything can happen. And my conclusion, and it's probably a conclusion that I've only had for the second half of my life, is living in God's economy, living in the miraculous. I don't want to live in boring show business commercial world. I want to live in the ministry world, the miraculous world. And part of that is, I'll probably finish with this. I think one of the things that happens in Christian music, people play it too safe. They'll follow a precedent, and every artist is different. Every artist has a different calling, and I think my encouragement is find a way of doing it differently, and that probably means finding a business partner, a manager, or a mentor that is prepared to think outside the box.
Yeah. That's good. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to be on our podcast. Like I said, if you haven't watched the movie, you definitely need to go watch Unsung Heroes or rent it, buy it. And you said your wife Helen has a book. What is that called?
Yeah, Behind the Lights.
Behind the Lights.
Yeah, and wisdom. Thank you for bringing wisdom to the old bloke, and you even brought your son along here today. So we've had a bit of a party.
Yeah. Thank you so much for imparting your wisdom with us. And I really appreciate just everything you've shared, just from all of your experience. And I really believe that the joy of the Lord really exudes out of you, and your passion at 75 is really inspiring. So,
well, it's been a wonderful and wild ride, and my only regret is that I didn't go deeper with Jesus earlier. And I suppose my hope is anyone who listens to this and they're kind of in between, they don't know whether to go business or ministry, go deeper with Jesus, because it really is incredible.
Yeah. Amen.